of things might be offensive to people who have autism?
I thought about this question a lot as well, because I want to have good answers for all the questions. But I think I have to fall back again on just that old line of, from my experience, which is very different from anyone else's with autism. Don't know really. I think that there's a perception from outside the autistic community that autistic people are very easy to offend and really sort of touchy. And sometimes I actually think that's true myself from, autistic people that I come into contact with. I do feel, in a way, some of them are waiting to be offended by different things that they're encountering in life. They're waiting to be upset about something that I or anyone else says. But from my personal experience, it's maybe down to the fact that I really tend to avoid any sort of stimulation that I find unpleasant. I don't follow too much of the news, and I don't go looking for experiences on social media where I'm going to get into a fight with someone about something. I'm not reading the comments under various articles in the news. I'm not trying to find places where people are in complete disagreement with the way that I'm living my life. Because whenever I do find that kind of disagreement, it makes me feel really, really horrible and torn up inside. I don't yet know how to manage all the emotions that disconnect and that disagreement brings out in me and in other people. I guess I'm personally offended whenever I see somebody. Hopefully none of you are smokers, but I get really offended when I see people smoking in public. I'm not so much the wee vape things, but actual cigarettes out in public where I can smell it. It makes me angry. Such a stench. And I feel like I cannot even breathe in a breath. And anyway, that's offensive, but it's not the sort of thing that I think I'm offended by that. I'm going to go up to that person and express to them my offense that they've given me. I try not to be offended.
I think what you've said there is important, because you try not to put yourself in a situation where you will be offended. So you are, as far as I, as long as I've known, you've always been very, very positive. You speak positively as well, and I think that just comes out of you because that's just the way that you are. So again, everybody is different. Some people may be offended by certain things, but it's tricky to know what that is. For example, actually, so there might be so autism is on a spectrum. So you've got what Chrissy said beforehand. Well, if you were to be diagnosed now, you'd be diagnosed as being autistic. But beforehand, it would be autism, maybe on this side, for example, and on this side, it would be possibly high functioning or Asperger's syndrome. Some people, so because of the term, because you wouldn't be, if you were diagnosed now, but you were seen to be on the high functioning side of, that's how it used to be, but used to be beforehand. Some people like to use the word Aspi to shorten the terminology Asperger's syndrome, and were offended because now you've taken away Asperger's syndrome. What does that mean for me? So that might be something where it's offensive because I was diagnosed as being with Asperger's syndrome, but actually now it's now classed as a whole spectrum, even though it was beforehand, but they used to sort of pinpoint, well, actually, I think you're this part of the spectrum and now you're on this part of the spectrum. And I mean, I'm no expert, but from what I know, it's a case of the reason why it's now not autism and Asperger's syndrome anymore is because it was too much confusion. Things change all the time. And it just wasn't really beneficial. So it was useful just to be able to give one diagnosis, because things change, things develop, and again, it's one of those things where developmental, the language that we use about autism keeps changing and keeps growing. So that might have been maybe something. That's what I've heard from somebody beforehand, where it was offensive to them that the terminology and the diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome was taken away because that's their identity. That's how they know themselves, and that's what they were diagnosed with, if that makes sense. So that's just a long-winded example.
When I was diagnosed, it was as Asperger's syndrome. So I guess I know, in a way, the person you're speaking about. I imagine I know what they feel when that diagnosis disappeared and doesn't exist anymore. Nobody would be diagnosed as being having Asperger's syndrome anymore. But at the same time, I don't know, you can take an approach to existing in the world where you expect other people to be doing things on purpose to hurt you, and you take offense at those perceived slights. Or you can take an approach to the world where you, I guess, probably idealistically and maybe stupidly, think that nobody's trying to upset me by taking away an Asperger's syndrome diagnosis. Nobody's doing that to hurt Chrissy. They're doing it for a reason that makes sense to them. And as well, having to say to people, if I want to disclose my diagnosis, saying to people that I'm autistic, it puts me in the same boat with all the other people that are autistic as well. It's not like, because I think the way that it used to be divided, Asperger's syndrome was at the high functioning end of the spectrum. We don't like to use high functioning and low functioning as dividers anymore, because it made it seem like, you know, everybody who has Asperger's syndrome, they're the great side of autism, and everybody who has low functioning autism or autism with learning disabilities, that's the rubbish end of the spectrum that you wouldn't want to be on. You want to be on the awesome end with Aspies. So I don't mind that they took that terminology away. We're sort of defined by what unites us now as being on the spectrum. But yeah, there absolutely are people who are offended by the lack of that terminology now. And I think there are people who just clung on to it and say, I have Asperger's syndrome, I'm not autistic. Asperger's syndrome.